Hello and welcome back. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Syrian forces have begun withdrawing from Sweida, with leader Ahmed al-Sharaa saying protecting the Druze citizens is the priority. The Syrian president, in a televised statement, says we are not afraid of war after Israeli strikes in the country. A coalition of countries say they will pursue accountability for Israel over the war in Gaza by preventing the transfer of weapons to Israel. The Hague group meets in Colombia, agreeing on 6 measures. Moscow's mayor says that air defences have downed 3 drones headed for Moscow this morning, with reports of a death and injuries in Russia's Belgorod. Meanwhile, Russia reportedly struck Ukraine with 400 drones and 1 ballistic missile the day prior. Donald Trump has said that Fed Chair Jerome Powell is doing a terrible job, but says he is not planning to sack him for now. Reports have suggested that Trump is looking to replace Powell, whose term comes to an end in 2026. The main stage of the Belgium dance festival Tomorrowland has burned down just 2 days before the event's grand opening to 400,000 attendees. Nobody was reported injured, while the cause was unknown. A federal judge in Tennessee has failed to rule on the legal status of Kilmer Abrego, the migrant who was wrongfully deported to El Salvador. Prosecutors are pushing to overturn an order allowing his release, as Abrego faces human smuggling charges. Brazil has urged the US to engage in new trade talks following a recent tariff hike from the Trump administration. Tensions have been high between both nations, with President Trump showing support for former leader Jair Bolsonaro. And meanwhile, Mexico is planning greater trade ties with Canada amid the ongoing tariff threats from the US. Further levies have been imposed in Mexico ahead of Trump's August 1st tariff deal deadline. We start this hour with Syrian interim president Ahmed al-Sharaa, who's vowed to hold accountable those who abused the Druze people following clashes that left over 350 dead in Sweida province. In a televised address, Sharaa thanked the US, Arab and Turkish mediation for diffusing a major escalation, while accusing Israel of targeting civilian and government sites. "We are not among those who fear war," he said, adding that Syria placed the people's interests above chaos and destruction. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the death toll included 79 Druze fighters, 55 civilians, 27 of whom were executed, 189 security forces and 18 Bedouin combatants. Well, joining us to discuss these latest comments from Ahmed al-Sharaa in the midst of more uncertainty in the Middle East, Jordan Cope, a Middle East affairs expert who is joining us from Dallas. Jordan, I'd first like to speak to you today about these comments that were made by Ahmed al-Sharaa, saying that the livelihood and the Druze people, they are a priority for Ahmed al-Sharaa, but also saying in the same comments that Syria is not afraid of war. What are your thoughts?
I definitely think Syria is afraid of war. One must not forget that yesterday the Syrian forces and the militias aiding them ultimately retreated after Israel decided to get involved with its aerial intervention. And once again, we've seen Syrian forces retreat today after Israel once again intervened and struck the Syrian Ministry of Defense and struck near the presidential palace of Ahmed al-Sharaa in Damascus, clearly sending the message to Damascus and to President al-Sharaa that Israel will intervene in this humanitarian operation to prevent a group from what it fears is fairly likely in the future a campaign of ethnic cleansing facing its people. We've now seen some of the most horrific scenes being perpetrated by Ahmed al-Sharaa's supporters and military forces in southern Syria. We've seen Druze bodies being run over by cars. We've seen hospitals with corpses all over the ground, bloodied, clearly evident that Druze members were killed in the hospital beds, doing nothing, no resistance at all whatsoever when they were being killed. The scenes are frankly horrifying. Druze men having their mustaches shaved off forcefully by troops belonging to Ahmed al-Sharaa, or at least his supporters. The mustaches for the Druze people hold significant religious and cultural significance. We're witnessing war crimes, and though al-Sharaa has pledged to rein in these people, he clearly hasn't in the past. One must not forget a few months ago when Ahmed al-Sharaa's supporters killed approximately 1,400 people belonging to the Alawite minority, from which Bashar al-Assad also belonged. So we're clearly seeing ethnic and sectarian tensions play out, and the only country in the world that actually seems to be doing something to protect this ethnic group of the Druze in the south, which comprise only 3% of Syria's population, the only country actually intervening in a humanitarian fashion to prevent what could be considered ethnic cleansing is the state of Israel.
Jordan, Ahmed al-Sharaa has said that he will hold those accountable, those who have carried out these killings and been involved in this violence. Do you think those words have weight?
Unfortunately, I don't necessarily think so. Many people in the West, many Western leaders wanted to give Ahmed al-Sharaa as much credits and plaudits as they possibly could when he seized power. I warned many people to have reservations when it comes to Ahmed al-Sharaa. After all, he's a member of the Hayat Tahrir, a formerly designated US designated terror organization. That designation was recently overturned due to other political considerations, but he has ties with al-Qaeda in Iraq, and America once had a bounty for $10 million on his head, and for good reason. Many should be very cautious, very hesitant. They shouldn't trust ultimately Ahmed al-Sharaa at this point. It's to no coincidence now that there have been 3 of these styles of attacks against ethnic groups where they have been massacred simply for the purpose of Ahmed al-Sharaa and his regime to assert and to project power over the entire country. But the current regime clearly does not respect the rights of its minorities. Clearly, as these men have gone in to Sweida, championing the most horrific of chants, promoting Arab nationalism, promoting chants of certain Sunni Islamist nature to make clear to the Druze minority, which does not belong to them, that this is not their land. Unfortunately, we've also seen Druze members on the ground being forced to bark like dogs, as Alawites were and Alawites were in the west of Syria a few months ago. And it's to no coincidence as well that the Kurds have also had some of their territory seized. We are witnessing, unfortunately, a very dangerous campaign against Syria's minority groups. And unfortunately, it seems that the world is leaving them to their own devices to fend for themselves, but for Israel, which has continued to intervene. But it's been too many times too late. Ahmed al-Sharaa's word is no longer so trustworthy. And even though the West tries to portray him as somebody trustworthy for the sake of trying to get the migrants and the refugees in Europe to return back to Syria, one needs to consider the humanitarian cost in this conflict.
Jordan, stay with us. We're going to stay on the topic with a related matter as world leaders have reacted after Israel struck Syria. Israel had stated that the strikes aimed to save Druze brothers and target regime gangs. Syrian interim president Ahmed al-Sharaa condemned what he called a wide-scale targeting of civilian and government sites, while Damascus labelled the attacks as treacherous aggression. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called the strikes unhinged aggression, demanding the world unite to end Israel's actions. He reaffirmed Iran's support for Syria's sovereignty, despite Sharaa having earlier criticised Iran for fomenting instability under Bashar al-Assad. Turkey confirmed that it had conveyed its position to Israel through intelligence channels. Let's have a listen to what the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan had to say.
Duyduğumuz bizim kendi görüşlerimizi, bu konuya ilişkin önerilerimizi istihbarat teşkilatımız üzerinden İsraillere de ilettik. Yani burada bir istikrar istemediğimizi, özellikle güneyde olan ve sivil bir takım zayiatlarla sonuçlanan, kimsenin tasvip etmediği olayların merkezi yönetimin bölgede bir güvenlik sağlayıcı tedbiri olmadığı sürece çözülemeyeceğini herkes biliyor. Oradaki Dürzilerin bir kısmının İsrail tarafından provoke edilip desteklenmesi ve bir istikrarsızlık unsuru haline gelmesi tabii ki kabul edilemez. Dürzilerle Bedeviler arasında vuku bulan çatışmalar bir şekilde güvenlik güçlerinin müdahalesiyle nihayete ermek durumunda. Orada her iki taraftan da sivil kayıplar.
Well, meanwhile, US President Donald Trump, seated alongside Bahrain's Crown Prince, remains silent, though Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the situation remains under intense monitoring. This is what the US Secretary of State had to say.
Yeah, it's complicated, obviously. These are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the south-west of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. So we've been engaged with them all morning long and all night long with both sides, and we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East is far more stable. So in the next few hours, we hope to see some real progress to end what you've been seeing over the last.
Yes, and once again, joining us is Jordan Cope. Thank you for staying with us as we look at some reactions from leaders across the world. Let's first look at that statement by Marco Rubio, of course, talking about de-escalation and potential efforts from the US to try and de-escalate this situation. How pivotal is that role from the US amid heightened tensions once again now in another region of the Middle East?
Marco Rubio's tone is clearly moderate, clearly trying to emphasize and to ultimately portray this as a misunderstanding because he knows there's a lot at stake behind the scenes. The United States recently undesignated Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and it obviously does not look good for the United States in the current situation to see members and supporters of Ahmed al-Shara's regime perpetrating what possibly could amount to war crimes and perhaps even ethnic cleansing as well. All of this being said, Marco Rubio also knows that the prospects of a potential security agreement or even normalization between Syria and Israel is at its highest possibility in the many decades that Israel and Syria have had tensions for. And so what Marco Rubio ultimately is probably hoping for is to de-escalate tensions and to see how he can forge potentially a security agreement or normalization between those two countries. The one difficult sticking point that remains to be resolved, obviously, comes to the Druze community and their ability to exercise de facto sovereignty in southern Syria and for there to be a demilitarized zone over there. However, all of this being said, Israel clearly wants to exercise what it is allowed to under international law, which is called the responsibility to protect, which demands the international community to intervene in instances of war crimes, ethnic cleansing, genocide, so on. And Israel clearly is the only country right now that has actually made an effort to exercise its humanitarian obligation to help spare the Druze community. Many of the Druze in Israel have actually tried to infiltrate the Syrian border to currently protect the Druze community and their Druze brethren and sisters from these incursions into southern Syria, while many Druze also have escaped into Israel. There's a clear affinity between the Druze in Israel, the Druze in Syria, and between Israel and the Druze communities, given that many of the Druze have served the Israeli Defense Forces very loyally, and Israel understands the responsibility it has to protect them as a minority in a region that is very hostile, unfortunately, to many different minorities.
Jordan Cope, as always, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak to us. We will continue to bring you all of the updates on the situation between Syria and Israel relating to the Druze people. But we move on now, and during a White House meeting with Bahrain's leader, US President Donald Trump claimed Iran was eager to negotiate with the United States, but stressed that he is in no rush to talk. This follows a warning from Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who said Tehran is prepared to respond to any renewed military strikes and can deliver a more forceful blow than it did during the 12-day war with Israel. Here is what the US President said.
And they do. They want to negotiate. They want to negotiate badly. We're in no rush because, we said we could have made a deal, they should have made a deal, and then we bombed the hell out of their various places. We're in no rush, but if they want to negotiate, we're here.
Meanwhile, US media has reported that the United States and its 3 European allies have set an end of August deadline for reaching a nuclear deal with Iran. According to reports, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the foreign ministers of the UK, France and Germany agreed the deadline in a phone call. Reportedly, if no deal is reached by that deadline, the 3 European powers plan to trigger the snapback mechanism that automatically reimposes all UN Security Council sanctions that were lifted under the 2015 Iran deal. The snapback provision is set to expire in October, with the activation process taking 30 days. European powers reportedly aim to complete this process before Russia assumes the presidency of the UN Security Council in October. Well, joining us to discuss this ongoing topic of uncertainty surrounding Iran's potential nuclear program and the reasons for that program, Ambassador Suresh Goel, a former diplomat, joining us from New Delhi. Unity here, Ambassador Goel, from the US and European nations. Why is that so significant?
Well, clearly, as you mentioned, George, that October is the time when Russia assumes the presidency of the Security Council and will have considerable leverage in its hand in terms of international peace and security and the issues related to nuclear deals, nuclear program of Iran. And therefore, we know it very well that Russia actually supports Iran in the matter of its own criterion, its own interest on the nuclear deal, and therefore they would want to do it before October. However, I am a little concerned that without really understanding or knowing what are the red lines on both the sides and how basically any kind of compromise or understanding can be reached to fix a deadline of August very artificially, how is it going to really work? Trump has the habit of announcing deadlines and then reneging at a later date from those deadlines and again fixing new deadlines. But what I would say is that it's important that rather than fixing the deadlines, negotiations should be entered into in earnest with seriousness rather than just essentially putting one or the other under pressure, artificial pressures.
Ambassador Goel,
so
sorry, I just want to interject on that point and look specifically at what Donald Trump has said in the White House, building off your point there. Of course, he says that Iran wants to come to the table, but the US is in no rush. Do you think Donald Trump is almost using this as a power play to try and strengthen the position that he has and push Iran to maybe make concessions that they wouldn't want to make otherwise?
What kind of power play? I really can't imagine. USA has tried the other things that it does have in its arsenal. Their efficacy has been in a bit of a doubt. We have had all kinds of news. Therefore, what I would again say is I think Trump is essentially playing his old game, indicating different things, creating contradictions at different times, saying different things. And that's the reason I think it's leading to a whole lot of confusion. On the one hand, they said that August is the deadline. On the other hand, he said that I'm in no rush. What exactly does he want? If you want, But I would say one thing. If you want really a stable Middle East and West Asia, you have to look at a broader view of the security of nations and all the nations, not just one. I don't see that happening at the moment, really. And therefore, I think we remain uncertain as to where it is going to lead to.
Yes, absolutely. Ambassador Goel, if you do stay with us, you're going to join us later in the programme. First, we're going to look at an emergency conference that has been held in Bogota by the Hague Group, which has ended with 12 countries signing a joint statement to end Israeli strikes on Gaza. The signatories, including Colombia, Cuba, Malaysia, South Africa and Iraq, condemned Israel's actions in Palestinian territories and pledged legal and diplomatic measures to halt them. The joint document outlines 6 actions to be implemented by September the 20th, including denial of arms to Israel, a ban on ships transporting such arms, and a review of public contracts for possible links to companies that benefit from commerce with Israel. UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese welcomed the move, urging governments to turn their arms embargo commitments into concrete policies. Let's have a listen to what the Colombian President, the Palestinian Minister of State and the United Nations Special Rapporteur had to say.
Bueno, de la OTAN tenemos que salir. Tenemos que configurar un ejército de la luz con todos los pueblos del mundo que quieran. Y tenemos que decirle a Europa que si quiere estar con América Latina o con África, deja de ayudar a los nazis. Y tenemos que decirle al pueblo norteamericano de todos los colores, porque ya es de todos los colores, que dejen de ayudar.
I believe what we did here yesterday and today is a turning point in the direction of not to tolerate the continuation of impunity and Israel to be above the law. We are beginning the process in which will be a massive wave of countries, of civil society organizations, of companies, of individuals, of all who cherish international law and justice to start taking practical steps in order to force Israel to stop the genocide against our people, especially.
The measures that have been agreed are to be absolutely welcomed, and now all states must implement them. Commitments to arms embargoes must turn into urgent policies and then domestic legislations enforceable by your judiciaries against all those who work to circumvent this commitment.
Well, joining us to discuss this latest update is Jim Rice, a professor of international law, who's joining us from Vigan in the Philippines. Jim, as always, thank you ever so much for your time. Is there any weight and any significance to this ruling that has happened after meetings in Colombia?
Thanks for having me on. Yes, I think that this is, excuse me, a very significant development because after years of paralysis on the part of the Security Council, in which, if there's a condemnation of the actions of Israel in Gaza and in other matters as well, the United States will consistently veto any resolution. And so what you're seeing now is a concerted effort on the part of the Global South, those countries that you just mentioned, and the UN Special Rapporteur. It's very important because they're finding their own ways of dealing with what is essentially a growing genocide in Gaza, in which they're actually using food. The Israelis are using food as a weapon to try and starve out children and non-combatants. And it's unacceptable. And I think that this is an important development.
Yes, Jim. And what comes next now after this ruling? Do you think that more nations could potentially join in making moves similar to this from the Hague Group?
It's difficult to determine what's going to happen in the future, but I think that nations in the developing world are increasingly fed up and not satisfied with the way things are, and they want to move beyond a simple dichotomy between the Russian Federation and the United States and China, and they want to act on their own. And I think this is a good development.
Jim Rice, we are unfortunately out of time on this topic, but thank you ever so much for joining us. We will, of course, bring you all of the updates on the ongoing situation in Gaza and the diplomacy surrounding the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. But we move to Europe now, and at least 2 people were killed and 27 injured in a Russian airstrike on a shopping centre and market in Dobropilya, eastern Ukraine, on Wednesday evening. The attack, involving a 500-kilogram bomb, reportedly damaged over 50 shops, 300 apartments and 8 cars. The strike occurred when the area was busy with shoppers. Donetsk Governor Vadim Flashkin condemned the bombing as an intentional targeting of civilians, while Ukrainian President Zelensky called the attack simply horrific, stating there was no military logic to it. Russia is yet to comment on the allegations. Here is what was said.
У Добропіллі Донецької області тривають рятувальні роботи після удару російської бомби просто по місту, по звичайному магазину, по звичайним торговельним павільйонам. Ще зараз немає точної інформації про те, скільки жертв цього удару. Станом на цей час відомо про 11 поранених і 2 загиблих. Мої співчуття рідним. Всі служби залучені, намагатимуться врятувати якнайбільше людей. Це просто жахливий, тупий російський терор. Жодного військового сенсу в їхніх ударах, тільки намагання забрати якнайбільше життів. Вся теперішня Росія в таких підлих ударах. Ми будемо відповідати. Будемо працювати з партнерами заради того, щоб примусити Росію до закінчення війни. І нашої власної сили заради цього теж має ставати більше.
Meanwhile, Moscow reported shooting down 3 drones heading towards the capital early on Thursday morning. No casualties have been reported there. Ukraine has not commented on the incident. Downed drones were intercepted while heading towards the Russian capital, with fragments of the drones reportedly found at various sites. Meanwhile, Russian air defense units have also reportedly destroyed 48 additional Ukrainian drones over several regions on Thursday, including Belgorod, Bryansk and Voronezh, all bordering Ukraine. The Ministry of Defense reported that 29 drones were downed in Belgorod. 1 person was reportedly injured in Voronezh, while somebody was also reportedly killed in the region of Belgorod. Well, joining us once again on the programme to discuss this ongoing conflict with further strikes, Ambassador Suresh Goel. We unfortunately don't have too much longer, but I just want your opinion on the ongoing situation, intensifying strikes, injuries and deaths being reported on both sides. What is really needed now in order to push for peace after Trump's 50-day deadline to Russia?
Thank you, Josh. And once again, it's a horrible thing when the civilians become a party or the civilians become targets of a warfare of this kind. They should be spared the horrors of war. And therefore, whether it is the drones going to Moscow or it is the Russian attacks on the mall, they are both to be condemned and they are both to be deplored. What I would say is that I do hope that within 50 days, Russia and Ukraine are able to find an agreement and a solution to the ongoing war. But I'm not too optimistic because this is actually a NATO war. And basically, we found that even after Trump said that this war must come to an end, NATO once again came together to encourage at least Ukraine with the weapon supplies and the financial aid and everything to really continue the effort. I'm not talking about the objective, but I think both countries need to sit together and find a solution, agreement, which both can accept, but I'm not optimistic.
Ambassador Goel, thank you ever so much for your time and discussing those topics. We do move on now, and President Donald Trump has once again criticised Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, calling his performance as Fed Chair terrible, but stated that firing him is highly unlikely at this time. Trump has reportedly been frustrated with Powell's reluctance to lower interest rates a move that President believes could help boost the economy. Despite nominating Powell for the role in 2017, Trump has expressed regret over his choice. He discussed the possibility of firing Powell with Republican lawmakers earlier this week, reportedly receiving their support. However, the president emphasised that unless there was a case of fraud, he wasn't planning to take action against Powell. Let's listen to what Trump said.
I think he does a terrible job. He's costing us a lot of money, and we fight through it. It's almost, the country's become so successful that it doesn't have a big impact, but it does hurt people wanting to get a mortgage. People want to buy a house. He's a terrible Fed chair. I was surprised he was appointed. I was surprised, frankly, that Biden put him in and extended him, but they did. So, no, we're not planning on doing anything. We're very concerned. He's doing a little renovation for $2.5 billion of the Fed, building a renovation, and they have a close to $900 million cost overrun.
Well, that's all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.